Martin.
To introduce you to Mr. Emile Naoumoff, and just to give you a quick synopsis, without using up too much of his time, he was, of course, the last.
That was it. More.
He was the last protege of Nadia Boulanger. He studied everything with her under the sun. When not working with her, he studied piano with Sviatoslav Richter, Clifford Curzon, Nikita Magalov, orchestration with Leonard Bernstein, conducting with Igor Markevich, toured around with the likes of Juan Paul, Georges Souzet,
So that was supposed to be short.
And all sorts of other exciting things like that. I could go into biographical stuff, but I think I'll just sum it up with two things that Nadia Boulanger had to say about Mr. Naoumoff. The first was she called him the great gift of my old age. And in an interview to a French paper, when asked about him, she said, Plato was a genius, Stravinsky was a genius, and my little Emile was a genius. So we're so happy to have him with
But
us.
that's that. Greg Martin is an amazing young man. She would have loved to teach.
The first question, I think, can you tell everybody a bit about how it was you found your way to Nadia Boulanger in Paris?
It was my parents who brought me to audition for her from behind the Iron Curtain, because I was born in Bulgaria. Nobody chooses. And so she used to receive on Wednesday afternoons anybody who was visiting Paris musically. And so I was presented to her, and the group of people like you here were around her, and then I played. And I played for her some Bach and some of my pieces. And then she turned to my father, who was there, and she said that she wants to teach me for 10 years, starting the next day. Except that I was not 8, and she was over 83. And every day was the last day. So I studied with a stopwatch. Thanks to my mom, I got quarter of a decent education because she woke me up at 5 a.m. to teach me school things. And the rest of the day was contrapoint, harmony, and fugue, and Bach. So it lasted for 9 and some years until somehow, unfortunately, she had to die. So I kept asking my mom, why didn't she give birth to me earlier? Ungrateful me. And, well, so since I was 18, I was an orphan. So that's basically it.
Picking up on what you mentioned there, can you tell us a bit what your average day might have been like during your years with her?
Well, as I say, it was always very, I mean, I was obviously grown as an Easter egg. Total attention. Emile shouldn't learn how to tie his shoes because he has more important things to do with contrapoint. Emile shouldn't know how to cook an egg to save himself from hunger because he has to do contrapoint. So my mother sort of substituted for everything that I could have expected. I was basically married to my mom for those 10 years too. So she was marvelous because we were in France and I didn't speak French except a little phonetically. And she was a French baccalaureate, so the 5 a.m. French lessons at home were very tough. And after 9, I would practice the piano because of the neighbors who wouldn't allow earlier. And then after this horrible lunch, that she kept buying those liver steaks because they were cheaper. I kept throwing them up. It was terrible. And in the afternoons, we would run to the lessons, because Mademoiselle Boulanger and her assistant, Mademoiselle Dieudonné, gave me a 3-hour lessons each, at least 3 times a week, with all the homework that it entitled. And Paris is a city that has a very good public transportation when not on strike, which very often it is. So we had to walk hours on end to get on time, and my mother made sure that no matter how many lessons, I should never be late for one single lesson of Mademoiselle Boulanger. So constantly sitting on stairs outside of her apartment, revising my lessons. And then in the evenings, Mademoiselle Boulanger would bring me to concerts. And after the concerts, she would treat me as a little adult. I would be at the cocktails she would have for the guest performers, like Bernstein, Rostropovich, and other heavy drinking gentlemen. And I guess, yes, she treated me as a little adult. And then her butler, who was an Italian gentleman by the name of Giuseppe, would drive me home with her antiquated Peugeot. And we start a few hours later at 5 a.m., so I basically never slept, which still continues. Because I had to take, let's put it this way, my mother was there to remind me of the exceptional opportunity to be studying with Mademoiselle Boulanger heavily. So I shouldn't, and must not fail until those fateful days where Mademoiselle Boulanger was disappointed in me because I couldn't guess the harmonizations of the Dubois harmony book. So I knew it was the end, it was the failure. And thank God she taught me one thing at this time, which was very early and very necessary: the difference between forbidden and tolerated. The rules for harmony are things you're forbidden to do, like parallelism, intervals, so you can more creatively do voice leading. But then when you compose your own music, it's tolerated. And so this very subtle distinction was very necessary for me as a child. So I didn't feel so overly bad that I couldn't hear those harmonizations that, of course, Jean-Français heard. And Jean-Français never made mistakes in harmony exercises. Not to mention, Bob Levin knows all the cantatas by heart, in every key. So, in other words, it was a constant put down. And I must say that she knew how to manage her effects. For instance, when I composed my Concerto No. 1, and she called Menuhin to conduct it, the next day at the lesson, she told me, "I hope you're aware you're not responsible for the success that happened last night." So, yeah. My parents and her insisted that I don't get, a French expression, la grosse tête, which means sort of like to feel like superior to others. So much so that I saw a lot of others being superior. But yeah, I had to learn how to tie shoes after she died.
And what about
Idiot salon.
the Wednesday classes? What was the atmosphere like in those?
We were here like that, all bunched up, and she would speak and speak and speak and speak. And we would be lost in her mental paths until at some point she would just embrace all these things within the piece we were analyzing. So it was more a challenge for the brain, because it's like in the movies when you ask, "Oh, who's the bad guy?" So we would be like, what is she speaking about? And given the fact that she was extremely witty rather than funny, she would sort of test our attention level. It was all about attention test. Basically, we failed. But since I was the outspoken one, because I had no fear since I was a child, I would be always on the piano, and I would give the examples and the answers, and I would try at least. So years after, I called some of my studio mates, who were then at least 15 to 20 years older than me in the beginning when I was a young child, asking them, was I obnoxious? And they said, no, I was very polite. So I guess it's something I owe my mom again. And Mademoiselle Boulanger was extremely old-fashioned in the Paris of the time, because this was just after the 1968 students' movement that basically broke down all the tradition of old France. And she was sort of like the representation of it in person. So it was a very, so many people in the Conservatoire de Paris were studying, were thinking she was dead in the same city. So she was sort of an entity. Cocteau used to say that she was invisible to the mediocre. So I guess it was a problem because I was studying at the Conservatoire, piano and chamber music with Madame Dutilleux and so forth. And my teacher, of course, was Mademoiselle Boulanger, my mentor, so to say. And it was uncomfortable because my teachers would be afraid to teach me by saying, do you think Mademoiselle Boulanger would approve of this with you? And so it was constantly me saying, no, please, just teach me. I'm not going to tell her. But they were fearing that I will play my piece to her when she'll ask, and she'll say, she allows you to do this diminuendo or ritenuto? Yeah. So I think they were more afraid of her sort of aura presence through me, as if I was a vector to reveal their weaknesses. Until all that accumulated to one of my many birthday parties, for which I had, for some reason, to provide my own gift. Mademoiselle Boulanger organized a birthday party for me, but I had to compose the piece that had to be played with people, friends of mine. And I was like, why do I have to compose a piece? It's like, it's supposed to be a gift I should receive. Anyway, so she always invited my other teachers. So there was this kind of little salon within the salon with the other mademoiselles, since World War I passed by there earlier, so they were all, it's the only thing women could do in France is be a music teacher. The rest was, in the 19th century, you're a horror and nun. I mean, it's very, it's true. And those women teachers were very strong because they had to survive 2 wars, actually. And so there was like a sort of a corner of the mademoiselles around Mademoiselle Boulanger, Mademoiselle Gervais, Mademoiselle Pascouret, Mademoiselle, all this. And so Emile will play his 13th nocturne, not mine, Fauré, obviously. And so every year I attempted to play it less bad. And so when I would finish it, Mademoiselle Boulanger would do the typical silent treatment, where nobody knows what to say uncomfortably. And so my piano teacher said, Mademoiselle Bousseau, she said, n'est-ce pas qu'il est charmant ce nocturne de Fauré? Isn't it such a charming music, this Fauré nocturne? And my teacher, who was a Fauré student, was so angry at people considering it with such light adjectives that she basically asked her to leave the room. Oh. Which was very with her, of course. It was very difficult to satisfy Mademoiselle Boulanger's expectations. You texted me during the week if Mademoiselle Boulanger was ever speaking of music reviewers, critics. Right? She never did. But she never spoke of interpretation. She only spoke of the pieces, oddly. I don't think she even considered interpretation at the level that performers do. I think she was in that old-fashioned school of hers where all the Paris Conservatory students studied organ without to be organist, but just for polyphony, and so on and so forth. So I don't think she was, yeah, that's why the 13th Nocturne by Fauré doesn't even bear an adjective. It just says, play the 13th Nocturne, and basically, shut up.
Well, can you talk a bit about what her approach to teaching composition was?
Well, she couldn't. Well, what she did is that in group class like today, here she would do an analysis of the piece, fine. But it's more like Marie Curie in her mobile X-rays during World War I. You see the body, so you see what you can save which limb. So that's analysis. Whenever she was one-to-one with the composer student, she would be so good at pinpointing immediately the weakness in the structure or in the melodic line or in anything. But it wouldn't be something that you would expect her, because she would never say twice the same thing. Meaning, it's not like she would be against tonality or against atonality or against serial music. Whatever they brought her, she would immediately see what are the weaknesses in what they brought her to speak about. And when Bernstein presented her Songfest, and he played for her this two-voice opening with the major seventh. And the B-flat comes before the pizzicato B-flat. She told him it's not fresh, it's not new, we just heard it. And he kept telling me, she's right, but I'm not going to change it. So generally, that's why I'm saying you cannot teach composition, because no student will accept to change something in composition. I mean, in front of you, perhaps, but in fact, no. I think it's almost like teaching somebody to learn from memory ahead. It's kind of awkward to say, but that's what composition is. You've heard it somewhere inside you, and you try to clarify it. Meanwhile, nobody else knows it. So if a teacher tells you something that corresponds to what is bugging you, then you might. But if it's just a general thing like, it's too long.
Well, you mentioned a couple of times the counterpoint exercise.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could play for us you said one of the things that, you've been doing this one for 40 years, that she made all the students do was the Josquin canon.
That was not counterpoint, it is polyrhythmia.
Oh, well, okay, well, but the playing of it,
The idea that, because she had an obsession that there is no downbeat and upbeat. Therefore, the upbeat is a rebound, the downbeat is a rebound, the upbeat is the impulse. And basically, when you have a canonic element, you don't have, I'm sorry, I'm boring, right? Oh, okay, because I want to speak kitchen stuff. Okay, I'll try to say it simply. Most people hear 2 against 3 is a syncopation, it is not. And most people verticalize the horizontality of the superimposed pulses. And in this case, it is true that it's each on first beat, and not in comparison, pom, 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 pom. I think to a certain extent that kind of listening, layered listening to anything, melodic as well as rhythmic, was something that she really encouraged in me. And thanks to my mother and my father and the creator behind giving me their perfect pitch, I could detect it very fast. So I could isolate the viola part in a Mozart symphony in the orchestra performance in my hearing, because I was trained to and I'm used to be able to. It's like, oh, he starts with division with violas. Thirds and sixths. So yeah, that's the kind of thing. And my father, who was a medical doctor besides other trades, he pretended that the human ear verticalizes because we need to summarize. And so that was a big debate at home between the horizontal hearing, which in a way isolates, and the vertical hearing that in a way assimilates. It's almost like as if you decide you want to eat only one food, but the combination of foods make the taste. And so her layered hearing, especially the two viola Mozart quintets.
What about the Bach fugues?
I can finish the sentence, I'm so sorry.
How did she expect you
I
to
don't
learn
do
Bach?
conferences, you understand? Oh, you obviously understood that. I'm so bad at it, I'm sorry. What did you say?
A Bach fugue. How did she make you learn the Bach fugues? What was the...
I had to write them from memory.
And
basically, the first stage was to copy it from the score, obviously. And then second stage was to write it from memory, having not played it. And on staffs and in the clefs, of course. And then after that, you start playing it. And that was my problem. I couldn't play them. I could solfege them, I could chew them, I could hear them, I could write them, and I couldn't play them. So 1 a week, I would say I knew them better than I could play them, but it was helpful because on her deathbed, she was, Mademoiselle Dieudonné, her assistant too, to keep her brain functioning. She was singing part by part a fugue of the well-tempered clavier. So when I would visit, I would sing the other part and would just be there on the bed singing Bach parts. But the way she taught me the fugues, it was essentially because of the verticality that overtakes the pianist's first approach. How does it fit together, you know, instead of really knowing the voices throughout, besides playing one, sing the other, etc., etc. But it's really writing it that helped the most. Writing it from memory.
do you feel comfortable giving us a demonstration of some of the recombining kind of things that you make you do with those? Moving the parts around?
Well, it's like, it's not fun for them.
I
think it's too much cooking stuff. You prepared so much good music to play. I rather not.
Let them decide. Do you want to hear them do one of these? Unless you don't want.
I might play my 13th nocturne to realize I still can't play. You mean like play a fugue and sing the other parts?
Move the voices around.
The idea is that you know it, so it's, I mean, what? By the way, I have a student at IU who one day told me, so did Madame Boulanger teach you the names of the notes for 10 years? Because of this horrible experience of mine to solfege everything. Which seems to be always some kind of fascination or rejection by my students. That I can solfege any piece. I even told them I cannot play concerts anymore. I'll just speak the notes. I'll do a concert of solfege.
Well, if you want to come back around, I've got one last question for you. I think
before you play the serious music that you prepared.
Just wondering if you could share a couple of words about some of the other people that you got to know in her circle. For example, somebody like Bernstein. what was your relationship with him, your impression of him? I mean, anything
Relationship with him is a loaded question. I would say that Mademoiselle Boulanger had the most, as I said earlier, compared to interpretation, the piece. I think same thing goes for the aura of the personality of her students. She would just go to the point. And the theatrics of Bernstein around her didn't impress her a lot. And it's a good thing because I must say that he studied with Copland, but never with her. Because Copland studied with her, he felt he studied with her through him. And of course, she was a young lady when she taught Copland, and she was a very old lady when she taught me. So, doubting that she said the same things. But with some exceptions, probably. Some must be the same.
What about Yehudi Mendelin?
Well, I didn't...
Oh, sorry. I thought
You asked me about Bernstein. So, Mademoiselle Boulanger organized for me to meet Mr. Bernstein in the hotel in Paris where he stayed, Hotel Crillon, the most expensive one. And she asked my mother to stay in the room and not leave any price. And so my mother and I arrive, and he sees my mother, because I was small, so she was taller behind me. He goes, "I knew you would be here, madame," and slammed the door. And then I played for him a concerto I had composed for piano, choir, and orchestra and triple choir. And I was playing all the parts, singing, and he sat next to me, started singing also, and playing some parts. And so when it was finished, he asked me to study with him in Tanglewood. So I came out of there, "Mom, I'll never wash my hands." He touched my hands, it was incredible, he's God and all. And Mademoiselle Boulanger was very adamant that I don't go to study in Tanglewood because she said he won't be even there for more than a few days in the summer, and you need to do your daily contrapoint exercise. So I didn't, and I must say that I had afterwards lessons with him in Paris when he was passing by. And he trusted my ear enough to ask me to attend his recording sessions and ask the EMI people from the recording booth to just only trust my ears. He was recording the Bloch Shlomo with Rostropovich. I didn't even know the piece. I felt so out of place. I was a young teenager. But he said, "I only want to speak in the booth with Emile. He has the ear." So, yeah, now that's one thing.
What about Yehudi Mendelin?
Well, that was the only man among the great human beings whom I met to work with, who matched his humanity matched his gift. It's unfortunate that it wasn't the case for most of the others. But I wasn't there to judge, though I couldn't not notice. Yeah, true humility. Of course, probably in that day and age. Today, at my university in Bloomington, they teach them how to market themselves in class. I guess it's the different time period. You know, today you have to learn how to play, and then you have to learn how to market yourself. It would have never occurred to Menuhin. All he did is practice to play better, because managers took care of it. And I must say that the day he came to conduct my concerto, he gave me his hand very enthusiastically. He says, "Je suis ici parce qu'Enesco." And I remember asking my mother, "What is Kenesco?" And he told me in French, "I'm here because of Enesco." And of course, since I was 10, I didn't know who Enesco was. But I knew who Menuhin was because my parents bought me his LPs, and of course, you know, he looks like the part. And it's only many years later that I called him on the phone and said, you know, it took me 2 or 3 years to understand that desire of yours to pass the torch, because when he was a child prodigy, Enesco conducted him in the Mendelssohn concerto. And Mlle Boulanger called him to conduct me in my concerto, and so he did it as a tribute to what was done to him by Enesco, which I thought was very humble of him as well. And we played, and he conducted my concerto, and he said something very, very sweet. He said, the musicians find it very seriously well written. And he respected very much what the musicians in the orchestra would think, and not just because I'm a child, which I wasn't, except in size. Because for everything else, I was a little adult. I mean, except the practical things. And so my concerto number 1, he conducted with such respect for a vague promise that I was. So when I think about it, I'm very humble, yeah.
And I think lastly, Sviatoslav Richter.
It was very different. Mademoiselle Boulanger spoke Russian because of her ancestry, but not very well, mostly German. And, yeah. And Richter, of course, German, spoke with Mademoiselle Boulanger a lot about religion. And so, in one of the concerts that was a private concert, he played the E-flat major Beethoven sonata for slow movement in C major with those pregnant silences. And he told her backstage or around the salon after that while he was playing that evening, during the rest, he saw God. So for Mademoiselle Boulanger was like, ignite her, because she would love to speak about God. And so all of a sudden, the two of them started in a theological Beethovenian conversation in German. But the thing with Victor is that he was not a thinker. I mean, he was often a little bit not polite, but he just goes into whatever he has to say. And he wouldn't care much about daily things. So I guess it was a very, because the place wasn't exactly a church. It was one of those salons with receptions where most people love to go to eat, as if music was just a prelude to food. And he was extremely mystical that night. And Mademoiselle Boulanger had this very reverent way to react to her religion. It always came to a point where she couldn't explain anything other than the grace of God. And so she wouldn't be one of those analysis teachers who would say it's beautiful because A plus B. She would say, I can see some of the skeleton, but for the soul, I refer. And so she says, if I accept grace, I accept beauty, then I don't have to even try to explain it. And I think that, Richter was, I think she liked him very much because he was not one of these people who would be social. Like she used to tell me that she couldn't finish any dinner with Boulanger because he made her laugh too much because he was constantly telling jokes. That's a very French thing to do, to be very deep, but apparently just very superficial. Whenever in the Russian, sometimes it's more heavy. Serious. Zakostropowicz. Problem artificiel. Yeah. I think your musicians are, I'm so terribly guilty that I overspoke. I wish that the musicians play.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.